I'm Lee Moore,
I'm Rob Moore.
and this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.
Lee, I'm curious. You sent me a pair of poems recently, and you didn't give me a lot of information about either poem. A little bit of background, but not a ton. And in both cases, I read these poems and just basically went, what? So your suggestion was that, hey, we should do a short series on really weird poems in the Chinese tradition. And so we just sort of arbitrarily picked this one to start with. Dear listener, I don't even really know how to describe this poem. I'm going to let Lee take a crack at it. My best shot at it, it's like Robert Burns, the Scottish poet, meets, I don't know, a late Qing poet.
That's exactly what it is, right?
Is
Rob?
it really? Well, you go. I don't have a lot of information on this one.
So this poem is by Hongming. He is a late Qing official. He writes this in honor of the 60th birthday of the Empress Dowager Cixi, a very reviled figure in Chinese history today. But back in the day, she was pretty much the emperor. I mean, she had supplanted her son, the emperor, in 1898. There was an attempt at reform. She and a lot of conservatives took power, pushed him out, essentially hid her son away, and she took power. Then, essentially in 1899, 1900, you had this rebellion start up in Shandong province, and it was named the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion got its name because they were, the fighters in this rebellion believed that they were imbued with mystical powers because of the martial arts that they practiced, and that they could dodge bullets, and they were going to rid all foreigners from China, get the devils out. It didn't quite work out. They invaded Beijing, led by the forces. One of the main Qing military figures in this whole thing was Prince Tuan, or Prince Tuan as it was spelt at the time. It's now spelt with in transliteration, it's spelt with a D, though at the time it would have been spelt with a T. So Tuan. You have this massive rebellion. Lots of foreigners are killed, and many more are trapped inside their houses or inside their embassies or their legations in Beijing. This was actually the source for a famous film, 55 Days in Peking, which, Rob, do you know who the lead actor was?
Not a clue.
Very famous actor named Charlton Heston.
Oh, I think I've heard of him. Isn't he the gun dude?
Yes, he was the head of the NRA for many, many years in America. The National Rifle Association, the NRA, is a highly politicized organization that he, in fact, helped politicize. Of course, we don't discuss politics, but it's just interesting to know that this whole thing, the kinds of connections. So
he also, we should point out that we do know he made movies as well. We're making a joke. In case the dear listeners did they really not know that he did stuff besides the gun thing? We do know. I'm just throwing it out there.
He was actually Moses, wasn't he? In the Ten Commandments.
He sure was. He was Moses. He was Ben-Hur.
Oh, that's right.
And then he ate people inadvertently at the end of Soylent Green. So he's had a rich career.
How does that connect with Robert Burns?
I mean, it's not any more random than the actual poem we're talking about, which you've already set it up. Late Qing official, 60th anniversary of Cixi, the Boxers. Can you tell me, Lee, why on earth this thing reads like a Robert Burns poem?
So Hongming, actually, we say late Qing official, but it's important to point out he was born in Penang, in a city in Malaysia. He went to school in Edinburgh, and that's Edinburgh, Scotland, not Edinburgh, Shandong. And so he was educated in this period where Robert Burns was kind of a god to Scottish poets. I mean, Robert Burns, of course, is the poet who wrote Auld Lang Syne, the song that everyone sings to ring in the new year. He is this fantastically important figure in Scottish poetry. Gu, in writing this poem, which we found the source for this poem is the papers from Viceroy's Yamen. It's an English language work on Gu's career in the Qing, and it's just completely random. He writes this poem on Empress Dowager Cixi's 60th birthday to celebrate the Boxer rebels. Now, throughout history, the Boxer rebels have largely been reviled as these kind of anti-modern crazies who wanted to kill all the foreigners. There have been some folks in Chinese history who have looked at them positively. It's a lot easier to talk about Boxers when you're farther away from them, so today their reputation is much better. But these are kind of like to put it into an American context, these are the Chinese equivalent of deplorables or very low class people, and I mean class not in a pejorative sense, like I'm insulting them, but they are a very low class. And Prince Tuan was a Qing figure who helped lead some of the military, who helped organize them militarily. So Gu has this poem written in a Scottish dialect. There were actually words in this English language poem. I don't know about you, Rob, but there were words in this English language poem that I had to look up myself because I did not know them. Yeah. So he's writing in this Scottish dialect as if Prince Tuan is some sort of Bonnie Prince Charles figure, which Bonnie Prince Charles is a Scottish figure who's very celebrated throughout Scotland as this kind of almost like Braveheart. I don't want to dive into the history of the United Kingdom. This is not the place for it. But essentially, it's kind of a rebel figure that sometimes is used to represent sort of Scottish traditions of independence. Maybe we're talking too much, Rob. Maybe I should just read some of the poem, if that's okay.
If you don't mind, I can try to read this in a Scottish accent.
Can you do that? Because
and then we'll see if it sounds absolutely horrible, and if it does, we can delete it. Or, dear listener, or even more fun, dear listener, you can write us and tell us what you think, if my Scottish accent is the worst ever or not.
Please, I know we have a couple of Scottish listeners, so please insult us.
I'm going to do my best, and then if one of you would care to record yourself reading this in an actual Scottish accent, that would be great. But this is the kind of poem it doesn't seem to make much sense unless someone at least tries it, so I'm going to try it. Are you ready?
Yes.
To the Lords of Convention 'twas Prince Tuan who spoke, ere the king's crown go down there are crowns to be broke. Then each boxer lad who loves fighting and fun, let him follow the bonnets of bonny Prince Tuan. Come fill up my cup, come fill up my can, come saddle my horses and call out my men, unfurl the banner and let fire the gun, for it's up with the bonnets of bonny Prince Tuan. That's the first stanza. I don't know if I dare go much further than that, but you get the idea, right? I mean,
I think we should go a little bit further.
All right. I'll tempt the fates and keep going here.
That was really good. I'm very impressed.
Well, I think it's impressed because you can't do it. I feel like if there's any Scottish listeners, they're like, oh no,
they're gonna be punching us if they're
kidding me. All right, I'll keep going. Prince Tuan, he is mounted. He rides up the street. The yells they shout backward, the drums they beat. But Li Hong Chang, Douce Man, said, "Oh, please, sir, man, we will try to get rid of that devil of Prince Tuan. Come fill up my cup, come fill up my can. Come saddle my horses and call out my men. Unfurl the banner and let fire the gun, for it's up with the bonnets of bonny Prince Tuan."
And we're not going to go through and read the whole thing. We will put the whole thing on the website.
Yes.
But this poem is amazing because it's, he's talking about Sichuan, he's talking about Shanxi, he's talking about the Zhangs of Hubei, the Lius of Hunan. Rob, how do we deal with this?
It's so weird. This is what's funny about a weird poem series. You as literary scholars, we're used to a certain degree of weirdness, but there's a line, and after that line, you're like, I don't know, man. What do we do with this? Because, there's a long history of Chinese, either people coming directly from China or people immigrating from China, etc., using foreign languages to write poems about China. They're very rarely as dialectic based as this one. And it's such a strange comparison. Can we think of an analog in English like that our American listeners would be familiar with? It's almost like having someone copying Yankee Doodle Dandy to talk about the Tiananmen Square protests or something. Like, it would be so weird.
I was going to say maybe this would be like the equivalent of a translation of Lao Tzu's Dao De Jing as if it were a country song.
Something like that. Yeah. Because of course, one of Robert Burns' calling card was this ability to combine dialect and art. Not that the two are mutually exclusive. I'm playing off sort of a popular awareness.
But frequently, art is perceived as a highfalutin thing.
Right.
Highfalutin equals high class, which high class generally equals like the most important dialect, which is the standard language. It's important to keep in mind that all languages are dialects, and that everyone speaks a dialect, even if you speak the King's English or standard broadcast American. That's just another dialect that's been elevated above the others for reasons of power and other things. Those are all just accents. So the reason that Chinese people wouldn't write a poem in English in a dialect is just because it's not all that powerful. Scottish represents, to put it quite bluntly, and I think Scots would agree with me on this, they represent the losing end in that United Kingdom duel between England and Scotland.
And so I suppose that would be why I'm curious is not that it's in a dialect, not even that it's in a non-Chinese dialect, but now if you did that, there would be, well, perhaps less in Xi's China, but at least a couple of years ago, if you'd done that, there'd be a certain amount of status that came with making China look great by using a foreigner's language, right? But when he's writing this, that's not really the case. This is, we're at least a decade or so away from everyone needing to be able to access foreign languages in order to be cool and cultured. This is still coming out of an era when that's not really a cool thing to do. So what's to be gained from doing this?
My question? What did the Empress Dowager think of this?
Wow. Could she even understand it? Maybe that's why he did it, so she wouldn't understand it.
Maybe. No, I mean, as far as I know, the Empress Dowager did not speak English. She certainly did not speak the Scottish dialect of English. So this would have been completely incomprehensible to her.
I have a thought, actually, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but this is the sort of thing that you have to express your thoughts or else they slip away. So the Chinese poetic tradition is a very long history of drawing off of actual song lyrics or writing poetry set to like melodies, actual musical melodies. So in Chinese literary tradition, having something that feels fairly sing-songy and, well, sort of like this, right, is not necessarily a low-class move. And making sure that people can sing it is kind of an honor all on its own. So it's possible that maybe when he's writing this, he's thinking, fine, but what if I write a poem like this that the Scots can sing? Imagine having a foreign country singing this poem about your culture. There's something more active and energetic about it.
I just want to point out this poem is actually even weirder than that. Scots were killed in the Boxer Rebellion, so to have him singing this song celebrating the Boxer rebels in a Scottish dialect, and it's in celebration not only of a movement that killed Scots and other foreigners, but it's a movement that defined itself as anti-foreign. It's so weird because why would you use a foreign language? Whether or not it's Scots or standard English, why would you use a foreign language to celebrate a movement that was anti-foreigner, that was about tearing up all of these foreign confangled railroads and getting these dang nab foreigners out of our country. Why would you? What's the point of writing that in English or in any foreign language?
So first, I'm impressed at how you stepped over the profanity landmines in that last couple of sentences. That was impressive. But second, maybe the using a foreign language is the late Qing equivalent of a middle finger to the foreigners. Like, I'm going to write praising this guy who tried to kill foreigners by using your dialect, and it's going to sound like your favorite poet. I don't know. I may be too sophisticated or snarky. Those aren't two terms that necessarily go together, but whatever. I'm going to use them. But that could be at work here. But one of the I have to say this too. This is one of the reasons I absolutely love the late Qing. Has there been any more random period in Chinese arts and letters in the late Qing?
It's just a grab bag, isn't it?
It's a grab bag. It's just everything going in the bucket, and you just stick your hand in and see what you can get, right? And
do you remember that episode we did on the news story of the stone, the Xin Shi Ji,
yes.
the
weird
sequel to the Dream of the Red Chamber, where Jia Baoyu wakes up Rip Van Winkle style in the late Qing, and then suddenly complains about all the foreigners, and then gets into that flying machine
and hunts an ancient Chinese beast.
It's so.
What's fun about it is
period.
It's just like people just letting it go. Let's just see what happens. Now, in that environment, this poem isn't that weird. Honestly, it kind of fits right in for some of this stuff. But you know what? I'll say this though too, because we haven't even touched on this. For what it is, for a poem that's consciously basing itself on Robert Burns, on a Scottish lyric tradition, it's really good. It doesn't read like a bad translation of something. It actually, the rhyme and the meter work, the rhythm works just fine. You can easily see someone singing this as they march. So it's actually kind of impressive in its own way.
It's not a bad poem. I mean, I don't think it's as good as some of Robert Burns' better stuff.
Oh no, goodness gracious!
I mean, Robert Burns was a genius, and I don't think Gu Hongming is a genius, but it's still pretty fun. As we start to wrap this up, I just want to point out this poem is almost completely unknown, even in Chinese literary studies. And I say
I wonder why.
What's interesting, so when I was trying to find this poem, I had read the first stanza. It's featured in Cohen's History in Three Keys, which is a discussion of the historiography and history of the Boxer Rebellion. Great study, by the way. But he only has the first stanza. And so I was trying to find the whole poem. I Googled this, and I found 2 results online.
Wow.
And neither of them were the complete poem. I had to dig quite deep in the internet tubes to find the original. But it's actually just published in an English language book that Gu Hongming did. So you can probably find it in a university library if you have a good Asian studies collection. We're going to put the entire poem on our website. Fascinating. Someone please, when you're drinking with someone, especially if you have Scottish friends.
Oh, man. Memorize this
and
yell it at the top of your lungs at a bar in Edinburgh. I'm dying. Put it on TikTok. Please, just send it to us. I can't do it. There's no Scottish bars here.
Sorry. But yeah. If you're in Edinburgh, if you're in Glasgow, please share this with some folks.
Amazing. Yes, please do. And before we forget, social media stuff, look us up. Instagram, Chinese Lit Pod, Twitter, Chin Lit Pod, Chinese Literature Podcast at gmail.com, and Patreon at Chinese Literature, there's no at there, Patreon, Chinese Literature Podcast. And please, we're not kidding here. If you have access to a Scottish environment and you do read this poem, please, for the love of all that is holy, send us something saying you did it or a recording. That would just be incredible.
Yeah, share your thoughts on it. This is an insanely crazy poem.
Yes.
It's a great poem to start our crazy poem series.
And we're only getting started.
We've set the bar pretty high.
We did set the bar pretty high, but I think the next one's going to meet it. I honestly do.
All right, I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.